A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was looking at the news coming out of Scotland this week, and I immediately thought of you, Herman. There is something about a high-stakes security breach that just has your name written all over it. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the recent arrests at Her Majesty's naval base Clyde, which most people know as Faslane, involving two individuals who tried to penetrate the perimeter of the United Kingdom's primary nuclear submarine base.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are hitting on a topic that is a perfect case study in the gap between public perception and technical reality. When people hear that someone got through a fence at a nuclear base, the immediate visceral reaction is a sort of cinematic panic. They imagine a couple of intruders hot-wiring a Vanguard-class submarine and launching a Trident missile from the dock. But the reality of how these systems are secured, especially when they are sitting in the Gare Loch, is far more layered and, frankly, far more robust than a chain-link fence.
It is a wild story, though. This happened just a few days ago in March 2026. Two people were picked up after a reported perimeter breach. And because Faslane is the sole operating base for the 4 Vanguard-class submarines that carry the United Kingdom's nuclear deterrent, the headlines go from zero to nuclear apocalypse in about 5 seconds. Daniel wants us to dig into how these weapons are actually maintained safely, both when they are out in the deep ocean and when they are sitting at the pier undergoing maintenance. Does a perimeter breach actually put the deterrent at risk, or is this just a failure of conventional base security?
The short answer is that the nuclear deterrent was never in jeopardy, but the breach is still a significant failure of what we call conventional force protection. To understand why, we have to look at the role of Faslane. It is the home of the Continuous At-Sea Deterrent, or CASD. The Royal Navy keeps at least one of its 4 submarines, the Vanguard, Victorious, Vigilant, or Vengeance, on patrol at all times. When a boat is at sea, it is in its most secure state. It is hidden, it is independent, and it is physically isolated from almost any threat. But when they come home to port for what are called Assisted Maintenance Periods, or AMPs, the security profile changes completely.
Right. Because at sea, the ocean is your best security feature. You have hundreds of meters of water in the entire North Atlantic to hide in. We talked about this back in episode 7063 when we looked at submarine stealth and navigation. Once they are under the waves, they are effectively ghosts. But at the dock, you are a stationary target. You are tied to a pier. You are plugged into shore power. And you have hundreds of civilian contractors and naval personnel crawling all over the boat. That feels like the moment of maximum vulnerability.
It is the moment of maximum physical accessibility, which is why the layers of security shift from stealth to active defense and cryptographic locking. When a submarine is at Faslane, it is often moved into the massive shiplift or docked at specialized berths. The physical security of the base is handled by the Ministry of Defense Police and the Royal Marines. They are the ones responsible for the fence line that was breached. But even if an intruder gets past the fence, they are still nowhere near the weapons. They would have to navigate a maze of armed patrols, biometric checkpoints, and then somehow gain access to a pressurized, steel-hulled vessel that is itself locked down.
So the fence is just the first of many hurdles. Let's talk about the actual weapons, the Trident II D-5 missiles. Most people probably assume there is a big red button on the bridge, but I know it is more complicated than that. If I'm a technician working on a missile tube during one of those maintenance periods, what is stopping me from doing something stupid or malicious?
That brings us to the core of nuclear security, the two-person rule and permissive action links, or PALS. The two-person rule is exactly what it sounds like, though it is enforced with rigorous technical protocols. No single person, regardless of rank, is ever allowed to be alone with a nuclear weapon or within the firing chain. This applies to maintenance just as much as it does to operational deployment. If you are servicing the guidance system or the reentry vehicle, you are always under the watchful eye of a second qualified person whose sole job is to ensure you follow procedure.
And the Permissive Action Links. I have heard that term used in the context of land-based silos, but how does it work on a submarine that is supposed to be able to fire even if London has been wiped off the map?
This is where the United Kingdom system is unique compared to the United States. In the American system, PALLs are cryptographic locks that require a code transmitted from the National Command Authority to unlock the weapon. Without that code, the firing circuit is physically interrupted. The United Kingdom uses a similar technical architecture, but they maintain a different command structure. The missiles are physically capable of being fired, but the process involves a series of mechanical and electronic interlocks that require multiple keys and codes held by different officers on the boat. During maintenance at Faslane, these systems are in what we call a de-alerted state. The firing chain is physically disconnected. It is not just a software lock, it is a hardware reality. You would need a crane, a specialized engineering team, and several hours of work to even put the system in a state where it could be activated.
That is a crucial distinction. The idea that a random person with a backpack could trigger something is physically impossible because the physical components required to complete the circuit aren't even connected when the boat is at the dock.
The Trident II D-5 is a 3-stage, solid-fuel missile. It weighs nearly 60,000 kilograms. You cannot just hotwire it. The process of preparing a missile for launch involves high-pressure gas systems to eject it from the tube before the first stage motor even ignites. All of those systems are locked out during maintenance. In fact, when a boat is in an assisted maintenance period, the safety protocols are often even more restrictive because you have so many outsiders on board. The Royal Navy uses a system called Nuclear Weapon Accident Response, or NWAR, which provides a blueprint for every conceivable mishap, from a fire on the pier to a security breach.
Let's go deeper into that maintenance cycle. You mentioned the Assisted Maintenance Period, or AMP. What does that actually look like for a Vanguard-class sub? Because these aren't just regular ships. They are nuclear reactors carrying nuclear missiles.
It is a logistical ballet. When a boat returns from a 3-month patrol, it is often in rough shape. Salt water is incredibly corrosive, and the mechanical stress of deep-sea operations is immense. During an AMP, the boat is often moved to the Faslane Shiplift. This is one of the largest structures of its kind in the world. It is a massive platform that can lift a 16,000-ton submarine completely out of the water. Once it is high and dry, the engineers can get to work on the hull, the propulsor, and the external sensors.
And while it is on that lift, what happens to the missiles? Do they stay on board?
Usually, yes. Removing a Trident missile is a massive undertaking. It requires a specialized crane and a very specific set of environmental conditions. Unless they are doing work that specifically requires the tubes to be empty, the missiles stay in their vertical launch tubes, but they are in a state of deep sleep. The power to the guidance systems is cut, the mechanical safeties are engaged, and the environmental control systems are plugged into the base's grid to keep the solid fuel at a constant temperature. If the temperature fluctuates too much, the fuel can crack, which would make the missile unstable. So, even when the boat is being repaired, there is a constant, automated monitoring system keeping those missiles in a safe state.
It sounds like the trade-off is between accessibility and security. You need to get to the hardware to fix it, but every time you open a hatch or a panel, you are creating a potential point of failure.
That is the paradox of nuclear maintenance. You want the system to be perfectly sealed and untouchable, but you also need to ensure it will work perfectly if called upon. This is why the Royal Navy uses a tiered access system. Even if you have a security clearance to be on the base, you need a specific clearance to be on the boat, and even then you need a specific authorization to be in the missile compartment. And even if you are in the missile compartment, you cannot touch anything without that second person present. It is layers upon layers of procedural friction designed to prevent any single point of failure.
This latest breach at Faslane highlights a growing problem, though. As we move further into the 2020s, the threats are becoming more asymmetric. You have activists, you have foreign intelligence agents, and you have people who are just testing the perimeter to see how the Royal Navy responds. The fact that 2 people got through the fence in March 2026 suggests that the soft security of the base needs a serious upgrade.
You are right, and this is where the second-order effects come in. If the public loses confidence in the physical security of the base, it undermines the political viability of the entire deterrent. If you cannot keep 2 people from climbing a fence, how can you tell the public that the most powerful weapons in history are safe? In the United Kingdom, the nuclear deterrent is a constant point of political contention, especially with the Scottish National Party and the proximity of Faslane to Glasgow. Any security lapse, no matter how minor in technical terms, becomes a massive political weapon for those who want to scrap the program.
It makes me think about the difference between the United Kingdom's setup and the United States model. We have multiple bases, like Kings Bay in Georgia and Bangor in Washington. If one base has a security scare, we have redundancy. The United Kingdom has everything at Faslane. It is a single-site dependency.
That geographic bottleneck is a significant strategic vulnerability. It is why the security at Faslane has to be perfect. The United States Navy can distribute its Ohio-class or the new Columbia-class boats across 2 oceans and multiple facilities. The Royal Navy does not have that luxury. Every single warhead, every missile, and every boat eventually passes through that one spot in Scotland. This is why the technical maintenance of the weapons themselves is so focused on system integrity. Even if the base is under siege, the weapons are designed to be inert and useless to anyone but the authorized crew operating under a specific set of orders.
Let's talk about the US comparison for a second. I remember reading about security reviews at Kings Bay and Bangor back in 2023. They were looking at things like drone swarms and cyber attacks on base infrastructure. Is Faslane keeping up with those kinds of threats?
They are trying, but the geography of the Gare Loch makes it difficult. It is a narrow body of water with public roads and hills overlooking the base. It is a beautiful part of Scotland, but a nightmare for a security officer. In the US, bases like Kings Bay are surrounded by vast tracts of government land, creating a massive buffer zone. At Faslane, the fence is the only thing separating the base from the civilian world. This is why the Royal Navy is moving toward more automated surveillance. They are looking at AI-driven thermal imaging that can distinguish between a deer hitting the fence and a human trying to cut through it. They are also deploying autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, to patrol the loch for divers or small submersibles.
That is an interesting shift, moving away from the bored human guard in the rain toward a machine that never sleeps. But does that create a new vulnerability? If the security system is AI-driven, can it be hacked?
That is the million-dollar question. Every time you add a layer of digital complexity, you are opening a new front in the cyber war. However, the core systems of the Trident missiles themselves are air-gapped. They are not connected to the base's Wi-Fi or the internet. To influence the missile, you have to be physically present with the hardware. The AI surveillance is just a doorbell. It is not the lock on the safe. But you are right that the psychology of deterrence changes when the machines are in charge of the perimeter.
I want to go back to the human factor for a moment. We talked about the 2-person rule, but what about the people themselves? The vetting process must be incredibly intense.
It is called developed vetting, or DV, and it is the highest level of security clearance in the United Kingdom. They don't just check your criminal record. They interview your friends, your ex-partners, your primary school teachers. They look at your finances to see if you are susceptible to bribery. They look at your mental health, and for the submarine service, there is an added layer of psychological screening. You are going to be locked in a steel tube for 3 months with no contact with the outside world, holding the keys to the end of the world. That requires a very specific kind of temperament.
And yet, we still have these breaches. It suggests that while the people inside the wire are vetted, the world outside is getting more unpredictable.
And that brings us to the concept of sovereign steel, which we discussed regarding carrier groups in episode 814. These assets are supposed to be untouchable symbols of national power. When that image is tarnished by a perimeter breach, the strategic cost is much higher than the actual security risk. If an adversary sees that 2 people can get into Faslane, they might start to wonder what else is possible. It erodes the aura of invincibility that is central to the idea of a deterrent.
So, for our listeners who are following this story, the takeaway is, don't panic about the nukes, but do pay attention to what this says about the state of naval security. A breach of perimeter is not a breach of system integrity. The Trident missiles are safe, the warheads are secure, and the two-person rule is still the gold standard for a reason.
That is the crucial distinction. The weapon is a system of systems. It is not just a bomb, it is a cryptographic, mechanical, and procedural fortress. To break that fortress, you need more than a pair of wire cutters and a dart jacket. You would need the kind of resources that only a nation-state possesses. The human factor will always be the most vulnerable point, but even there, the layers of vetting and the two-person rule make it an incredibly difficult nut to crack.
Let's talk about the technical reality of the weapons at sea versus at dock one more time. When a boat is on patrol, it is in a strategic state. Herman, what does that actually mean for the hardware?
In the strategic state, the missile systems are kept in a state of constant readiness. The environmental systems in the tubes are precisely controlled for temperature and humidity to ensure the solid fuel and the electronics do not degrade. The inertial navigation system of the missile is constantly being updated with the submarine's position so that it knows exactly where it is starting from if it ever needs to fly. It is a state of warm readiness. When the boat comes to the dock, it moves to a maintenance state. The navigation updates are stopped, the firing circuits are physically interrupted with safety pins and locks, and the system is essentially put into a coma. This is the de-alerting process that was a big topic of international diplomacy in the late 20th century. It ensures that an accidental launch is physically impossible.
So, even if the letter of last resort inside the safe on the submarine says launch, the crew could not do it while they are sitting at Faslane without a massive effort to reinitialize the system.
The firing sequence is a complex choreography that requires the boat to be at a certain depth, at a certain speed, and with all systems transitionally aligned. You cannot do that while you are tied to a pier with a shore power cable plugged into your side. The submarine itself is part of the safety interlock. The physics of the launch process are a security feature. The Trident D-5 is cold-launched, meaning it is blown out of the tube by high-pressure steam. If the boat isn't in the water at the right depth, that process doesn't work. The missile would just sit there.
That makes me feel a bit better about the Scottish teenagers or activists climbing the fence. It is a failure of the Ministry of Defence's keep people off our lawn policy, but it is not we almost had a nuclear war situation.
It is a PR disaster, but a technical non-event. However, we should not be complacent. In episode 1017, we talked about the nuclear shell game and how difficult it is to verify when a system is actually neutralized. The same logic applies here. The reason the security has to be so visible and so aggressive is to maintain the psychology of deterrence. If the world thinks your bases are easy to penetrate, the deterrent loses its teeth. Deterrence is as much about what people believe you can do as it is about what you can actually do.
That is a deep point. If the deterrent is a mind game, then the fence is part of the game. If the fence is broken, the game changes.
That is why the response to this March 2026 breach will likely be a massive increase in funding for Faslane's security infrastructure. We will see more hard barriers, more sensors, and probably a more aggressive legal stance against anyone who even approaches the perimeter. The Royal Navy has to reestablish the aura of invincibility.
It is interesting to think about the political perspective on this too. A pro-strength, pro-military worldview would see this breach as a call to action. It is an argument for more investment in the hard power of the state. If you are going to have these weapons, you have to protect them with an iron fist. There is no room for good enough when it comes to the nuclear triad.
The conservative worldview on this is very clear: peace through strength, and strength requires competence. A perimeter breach is a sign of institutional lethality being undermined by administrative or security lapses. Whether you are in the United States or the United Kingdom, the maintenance of the nuclear shield is the primary responsibility of the state. If you fail at the fence, you are signaling a lack of seriousness that our adversaries are absolutely watching.
I imagine the transit between Faslane and Kulpur is another one of those high-stress moments. Kulpur is where the actual warheads are stored, right?
Yes, Royal Naval Armaments. Depot Kulport is just a few miles away on Loch Long. It is where the warheads are processed and mated to the missiles. The transit between the two sites is one of the most heavily guarded activities in the United Kingdom. You see these massive convoys with dozens of armored vehicles, specialized trailers, and police escorts. That is where the physical security is at its absolute peak because the weapons are being moved in a conventional environment. If you want to see the state's power on full display, that is where you look.
It is a fascinating look at the hidden world of nuclear maintenance. We spend so much time thinking about the boom, but the real work is in the wait. It is the decades of silent, meticulous maintenance in places like Faslane that actually keep the peace.
The nuclear peace is a high-maintenance relationship. It requires constant attention, constant investment, and a total intolerance for error. This breach is a wake-up call for the Royal Navy to tighten up the soft side of that relationship before someone with more than a backpack decides to test the fence. We are moving toward a world of autonomous perimeter defense because humans are, frankly, the weak link. A machine doesn't get distracted by a protest or tired by a long shift in the rain.
Is the current model of centralized naval bases even sustainable, though? If Faslane is such a bottleneck, will the United Kingdom ever look at diversifying?
It is unlikely. The cost of building a second nuclear-certified base is astronomical. It is not just a dock. It is the specialized shiplifts, the nuclear-certified workshops, the secure communications, and the entire ecosystem of Coolport. The United Kingdom is committed to the single-site model for the foreseeable future. That means the pressure on Faslane will only increase as the Vanguard-class is eventually replaced by the new Dreadnought-class submarines in the early 2030s.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here, from the shiplifts of Scotland to the cryptographic locks of the Trident D-5. It is a reminder that the world of high-stakes security is always a race between the intruder and the engineer.
And the engineers have a significant head start in this particular race. The physics of nuclear deterrence are on their side. The complexity of the systems themselves acts as a form of security. You cannot steal what you cannot understand, and you cannot operate what you cannot power.
Before we wrap up, I want to give a shout out to Daniel for this prompt. It is a perfect example of how a small news item can open up a massive technical and strategic conversation. If you're enjoying these deep dives into the weird and wonderful world of technology and security, make sure to follow us.
We have got a lot more to explore. The world is not getting any less complicated, and the systems we use to manage it are only getting more fascinating.
Big thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a huge thank you to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. Their support allows us to dive deep into these complex topics every single week.
This has been My Weird Prompts. We will be back soon with another exploration of the ideas and technologies shaping our world.
If you want to stay updated, search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram to get notified the second the new episode drops. It is the best way to make sure you never miss a deep dive.
Until next time, stay curious and keep asking the weird questions.
We will see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth